Go. All right. Hello. Welcome everyone who is here for the first ever pregame show for the Champion Draft Series. This is going to be a little different than a lot of other CDS stuff that you might have seen before. Most of that on the YouTube channel, just like me in a suit coat being like, welcome to the Champion Draft Series. This is a little bit more open. A little bit more formal. We're just trying to bring up some excitement, talk about like potential matchups and what we think might happen, and then wait till next week when the players prove us completely wrong. Also, sort of add as like a hype show to go with our like Pick'em series. And I have with me today Aikado, who some of you may know as probably one of our top contenders in the last season. While I may have been the person who created this format, he's actually played this format much more than I have.
Not false. I did okay the last time around. You know, I wasn't quite able to beat Spids, but you know, I did all right.
Bro, that final game that you played in the season with like level 2 Karma onto Dawn and Dusk, like it still lives rent free in my brain to this day. that was a match and a half. But yeah, you, unlike a lot of the viewers yet so far, have had a lot of time to like think strategically about your own team and like what other teams are like bringing against you. And I think that perspective is going to be really valuable in games like this, so that when when viewers are trying to select who they think might win, instead of just going with their gut, which can also often be very wrong. No offense to you viewers out there, but we've definitely had some big upsets already in this season. Now you guys can listen to us talk about it, and maybe it might influence your mind, your thoughts a little bit. So
exactly,
yeah, yeah. I'd like to introduce the first match of week 3 to you, Aikado. I'm not sure how much you've followed these two players already, but these are two of the 3 teams that do not have 10 champions. Shodox specifically did not have the budget to afford a 10th one. And so Termin's just been sitting on 8 points, hoping to potentially use those points in some way for like to benefit in some trade or something. But we've got these players on even footing. How do you feel about their teams?
I mean, you know, if you have a good array of 9 champions, I mean, having 9 champions isn't that much of a weakness, right? Mm-hmm. I do say that, like, just looking at Termin's list of champions, I love Termin's champions so much. There's so much here that I love. You know, there's a lot of flexibility. You know, triple Targon, you know, in a 9 champion roster is definitely like a little bit limiting, but Cosmic Call exists, so like it's not really at the end of the day. But yeah, I especially, you know, even looking at his lineups that he went with, you know, from last week to this week, right? Like last week or the first week, he went with like a triple Cosmic Call lineup. Mm-hmm. And then the second week, it feels like he came into his own and sort of, you know, like built real decks and like, you know, figured out that this PNZ Bilgewater is actually really good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm a big fan of his champion lineup. Super big fan of it.
He just managed to pick up so many powerful champions in the draft. Like, I don't understand. I mean, Twisted Fate, very expensive champion. For those who are just joining us from maybe the previous season of the Champion Draft Series, we're no longer doing like a letter tier grade draft. It's a point buy system now. But Twisted Fate, of course, still a very expensive champion that might have turned some players off to him. But like 4th round pick, like that's insane to me how he was still able to grab that.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of points by, and Twisted Fate is just such a flexible card, right? Mm-hmm. Especially because Bilgewater got quite a few new cards that are pretty strong right now with the Neela package. Having access to that and being able to, you know, throw that in is definitely impactful. Yeah.
Now, going off of Shodox's team, Shodox also has a lot of very good champions, I would have to say. Like, there's a reason he ran out of budget going into the 9th round. He's got some powerhouse picks. Victor alone, you can just put him in any deck and he might just hit like the right keywords and win the game for you, right? Like,
yeah, Victor's very good. You know, especially because Piltover and Zon, I mean, big surprise, a pretty strong region.
Yeah.
You know, when I played, I tried to have like 4 different Piltover and Zon champions. You know, only one on each here that I see, but still pretty good region, and quite a bit that you can do with him. You can combine him with basically anyone. You could go with like Annie for like a Noxus control style. You could go with SI. Yeah, he has Elise. SI is like a pretty good control style as well. Like I think there's a lot you can do with this champion, or just throw him in Targon and you have a Cosmic Call with deck,
which I believe he's done already. But yeah, there's a lot of synergy between these champions. I think the only thing that like reaches out to me, and I wouldn't even call it a weakness of Shotox's, but I feel like his lineup specifically would really like access to Bandle City. I feel like Jhin would like Bandle City. I feel like you could do like Noxus Bandle City stuff with Annie that like sort of miss out on. Maybe even just like Shurima, get yourself like some Shellfolk Bandle City in there with Renekton. I've seen weirder uses of Shellfolk already this season. So I wouldn't even call that a weakness, but that's definitely something that I feel like the lineup of the Canadian Shine Times yearns for. That being said, he's currently the only undefeated team in the series so far. Everyone else has lost once.
Yeah, obviously doing well with the champions he has available. I mean, and it's so funny. You see Annie plus Jhin, right? And you immediately think, that's an aggro deck right there. That's a pre-built aggro deck that everyone plays. It's good in Eternal. It's solid in Standard. Like you just jam that in there. And he's playing Annie Jhin. He's just not playing it aggro.
No, he's
basically pretending he's playing the Bandle deck.
His first game against Grandpa Roji, he just sat there with the Jhin in hand, and like I think he played a Tibok already, and he was just playing skills and just like slowly burning him down, just with Jin's skill. Didn't even have to play him onto the board, risk losing him or anything. He just consistently whittled him down, which I think is very strong. Now, the thing that most excites me about doing this sort of pregame show is, besides just like looking at their rosters and looking at like the strong things in their rosters, but now looking at them through the lens of, okay, this is the opponent that I am facing. What do we expect them to maybe bring out? What do we expect to maybe be exploited? The thing that stands out to me immediately when looking at Sir Turman's roster, I see no access to Shurima. I see no access to Ionia. I see that my opponent has like basically no counter spells. If I'm Shotox, he like cannot run those. And as a player, I want to try to find a way to abuse that. I'm not sure how exactly you would, but that's a hole that not many players have.
I mean, even just looking at Shotox's, stuff that he's brought previously, right? Like last week he brought the Taric rally, infinite rally bullshit that you can do. He also brought, am I allowed to curse? Maybe I shouldn't curse.
Go. Don't say anything like extremely offensive, but otherwise it's fine.
I'll do my best.
Anything that would cancel you, don't say it.
The other thing is he's willing to play Alawi, right? You know, even outside of like, a normal region pairing, he's still played it with Renekton, right? So he has like quite a bit of, like a more aggressive slanted mid range that like might be able to take advantage of some of what Termit is trying to build. I look at Termit and I see a lot of, like control-y decks, a lot of Cosmic Call, a lot of even like the Ezreal Twisted Fate, like that's, a very mid-range control-y, and like might have trouble dealing with some of the bigger units, some of the bigger threats. That said, I mean, he does have access to double SI, and SI in this format's like very good, especially because, you're playing in Eternal, stuff like Valfeast is around. That's really, as it turns out, a pretty good card.
Do you think if you're Shotox that you, going into a triple Targon double SI lineup, that you value Taric for potential like spell shield shenanigans, like Dismissive Vengeance or like some sort of like hard removal? Do you think that's valuable, or you think that's like too pigeonholing?
I think that Taric is going to be really strong. I can't imagine that he wouldn't bring just like Taric Rally, right? With Lux like he's done previously. I could not imagine. Even the list that he brought last week is on like 2 Bastion, 2 Divine Judgment. Like that's, I don't know. Obviously he sees value in it, right? So yeah, no, I definitely I definitely would be leaning towards him bringing Tark and like it potentially being banned. It depends on what direction Termund has. I feel like Termund, it has a lot of like flexibility here, whether he goes with like the Maokai Mill or like, a Vagar in like a Cosmic Call deck. He has a lot of flexibility in that regard. But yeah, I feel like there's a 0% chance that Shodox doesn't bring Tark Rally.
So if you are Termund and that is something that you consider, is that something that you maybe perchance try to target, or is it just something that you are looking at like potentially banning? Like if you're Termund right now, what are you looking to bring, do you think?
I would, if I'm Termund right now, one thing that's important is that Shodox can't bring Cosmic Call and Taric Rally, right? Because Taric is the only Targon champion here. So you kind of only have to worry about one of those. I would lean towards expecting like a mid-range heavy lineup out of Shodox and then maybe like the Jhin. So maybe I would go like double SI, pack in a couple Ruinations, lots of Vengeances. Soul Harvest is also really good against, Alawi and Taric. Yeah, I think that type of a lineup is probably what I would look for. It probably is like, the Viego Maokai. It probably is like the Aphelios Diana Vagar, just to get SI. And then your third deck, I'm not sure what it ends up being. Maybe it is just like Ezreal Twisted Fate and just assume you're going to get there. But yeah, I would definitely index towards trying to beat like this heavy mid-range lineup that I think Shodox has.
And perhaps on the flip side, if you are Shodox and you're looking at like all these SI Targon, what exactly are you? You mentioned a little bit of like mid-range, like just trying to go over him, hit him with a bunch of big units. You think that's still like a good call?
Yeah, I think throwing a Taric at them, like, it just can't go wrong, right? Just throw enough Tarics at them, rally at them enough that I think you'll be totally fine. Maybe you go like Shen Alawi, because then you get to run like Denies plus Syncopation. It's like the Pink Alawi deck. And then like your third deck, it could just still be like the Annie Jhin. It could be, Annie Elise, try and like go hard copier on them or something. There's definitely options in there, but I do think that I would start out with an Alawi deck and a Taric deck.
Very good. So last question, and I'll let those of you in chat as well input on this if you want to, but who do you think has the edge in this match if you're leaning in a certain direction? Like who do you expect, maybe sort of just looking at rosters and then maybe knowing the players as well, evaluating who do we think has the edge here. I'm personally leaning a little bit towards Shodox, just because of how he has been playing against his opponents before. But
Shodox, go with the hot hand if you want, right? He is 2-0. He's obviously doing very well. Feels very comfortable with his stuff. That said, Termund did change his lineup quite a bit from week 1 to week 2. He won week 2. I feel like, he's really got an idea of what he wants to do with his lineup. I feel more comfortable with that. I would lean towards towards Termund.
You're going to lean towards Termund.
Yeah, I would. He's figured out his lineup. He's won the last one. Got to keep winning.
Well, there we go. We as the host of this show, we're already split 50-50. So this is probably going to be a very interesting match. So let's go ahead and move on to our next match. Which
you're so right, by the way. He would do so well with Bandle City. Bandle would go really well in Shodox's. Yeah, you're so right.
Well, we'll see if he does any trades recently. But unfortunately, we have a player here in this next match who not only has sort of like a ownership of so many Bandle champions, but also P and Z as well.
Yeah.
Look at over at Bust lineup. We've got the Ionian Idiots with Majin Bay versus the BC Buster Shots by FTP Bust, who both players started off really hot this season with a win in their first match, and then both of them lost week 2.
Yeah, and Majin didn't change his decks at all from week 1 to week 2, decided to run it back. To be fair, I think he has pretty reasonable decks, right? He's brought like Thresh Nasus, the Rise deck that, was obviously very good in last CDS, obviously pretty good in this one. It is Majin Bay. And then his third lineup was just the Cosmic Call with Sump Monument, which, it turns out also pretty good. It hasn't been changed yet. And his lineup was pretty solid. He has quite a few, when you look at people's drafts, you see like pairings of champions that are, pretty naturally put together, like Thresh Nasus, like Jace Heimerdinger, or like this Rise Master Yi, right? Like he has a lot of these like pre-built synergies, and seemingly has been leaning into that so far. I think it's... I think his champion lineup is pretty good, even if, a little inflexible so far.
Yeah, I do think I remember Majin saying in his VOD that like he just didn't prep at all for the second match and was just running back the old decks, but I think he is planning on adjusting his strategy to fit his opponent this week. At least I would expect something like that. And he has been running the same decks. There are all uses for other champions, like that Nami can go with Zoe in like an elusive deck and probably still be very strong. Ashe can work with Thresh if you want to do like some zombie Ashe shenanigans, which is not the strongest deck overall in the meta, but could probably definitely counter a few archetypes pretty easily. Yuumi having a second Targon champion, giving you that Cosmic Call or synergizing with some of the other decks that you might have. I mean, he has a lot of options here and a lot of regions accessible to him.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing is, you look at what BC Buster Shots has been bringing previously. It's quite a bit of aggro. It's quite a bit of, aggressively slanted decks. And I do think that like if there's one strength that Majin's lineup has, it's pretty good in aggro. Other than, potentially a Rise deck folding to aggro. Everything else that he's doing is very, very good into aggro.
Yeah, so that might be a reason for Bust to not go into like a very focused, aggressive lineup this time. He did, I want to point out for those of you who have been following the Champion Draft Series, Bust just this week obtained Samira, who you see lost Hecarim. He traded Hecarim for Samira with L Games Brazil. So that he now has a little bit more Noxus access for that aggression, but what might end up coming out this week, Aikado, and I want to get your take on this. It's something that's been the looming threat that is Bust's lineup over the course of this season that has yet to really pop out. He brought one, but he sort of strategized his whole lineup around being able to bring 3 Timelines decks all at once.
Yeah. And like usually when, in like the CDS, when you start trying to, put together a lineup like that, you're going to end up with like some fucky lineups, like your third deck's going to be a little bit sus, but he has the 3 good Timelines decks. He has Jax Vi, he has Caitlyn Trundle, and then like Jinx plus, Lulu, or, and you just go Bandle, right? Like he has very solid options for these Timelines decks. I don't necessarily think he'll go that direction, especially picking up Samira. I think that the only thing you can really do with Samira, looking at this lineup, is like go Samira Jinx. I imagine they really wanted access to Noxus for the Jinx. Potentially could go like Samira Caitlyn and try and build like some sort of a control deck, but I would very much expect to see like Samira Jinx, and you just go like full aggro and try and take advantage of the Rise. So, yeah, Timelines is very scary until, hopefully a few days from now, Riot completely removes it from the game. Until then, he definitely has the option to. And, Timelines, I think like Jax Vi is just like such a good deck that it's hard not to bring in.
That is one of the risks about like building your lineups around this whole strategy, because we here at the Champion Draft Series are not responsible for any of the balance changes done by Riot Games. We do offer, if they directly balance one of your champions, you can do a free trade with them without it like costing you anything of the limited amount of free trades that you're allowed to do. But if they nerf Timelines isn't a champion. You're just going to have to suck it up. So that could end up becoming a problem for Bust later down the line if there is a nerf.
Definitely very limiting if that ends up coming to be. Very limiting in terms of like what you're allowed to do after that. Yeah. I keep looking at Majin's lineup, and there's not a ton of flexibility in there. I feel like he can't go like double SI, right? Mm-hmm. So he can't play like Jace Heimer SI or something. He just has the one SI champion.
He could like go one Thresh, two Heimer, three Jace or something like that.
Yeah.
And have like...
It's definitely a possibility, but then you miss out on like Thresh Nasus. I feel like he's definitely bringing Thresh Nasus this week just because it's very good into other aggro decks, and it's a very flexible deck. Mm-hmm. I feel like 100% he has to bring that. Do we know what did he lose on last week?
I can tell you exactly what he lost on because I was watching those games. He lost to Cephalopod. He never got to play anything other than Rise. He just locked in Rise in 2 games. He got 2-0'd
nice.
By Rumblevane, who just hit the nuts and just like ran over him. And then Cephalopod built a special edition of Echo Zillion that was designed to like have so much landmark removal, because if you play Explorer with a leveled Zillion, you get, I thought, 1 card, 4 landmark removal spells.
Oh my god.
So
okay.
that was the whole genius behind that. And the game 2 ended up being pretty close. Game 1 was not. But game 2 ended up being pretty close, but one Absolver ended up sealing the deal for Cephalopod. And that Rise just got run over.
Wow. So I wonder if Majin will have the confidence to run it back, especially because like, okay, if he was winning on Rise the whole time, then you could look at the triple aggro lineup and be like, I'll probably beat that. I'll be fine. But if you just got 2-0'd on it, like there's no way you can run Rise back into this aggro, which is probably bad for Bust, because Majin can go pretty anti-aggro. It might be and it's probably a Cosmic Call deck. It's probably like Cosmic Call, Sump Monument, and then Thresh Nasus, and then I don't know what his third deck is. This is not being able to go like double Targon PNZ. Like, if he could go that twice, he'd be fucking golden. But he can't really go that.
Yeah. That would be very beneficial to him. This is where the whole prep phase of the Champion Draft series like interests me and gets me so hyped, because we're talking about this right now where it's like, well, Bust could go in a very aggressive route and completely abuse Rise in Majin's lineup. But what if Majin doesn't bring Rise? What if Majin recognizes that and brings decks that are really good into aggro? But what if Bust predicts that and tries to go much bigger and maybe tries to hit him with timelines or something like that?
Yeah.
So it's going to entirely depend on the choices that these players make and what they like bring. And so much strategy goes into this series before you even lock in your decks. And that's one of the things I really like about it.
Oh, 100%. 100%. You just kind of have to call what you think your opponent's going to bring. It's so important. So like, when somebody doesn't change their lineup multiple weeks in a row, you feel really confident going in that you can build something that's going to be, very favored into it. God, Majin's lineup. Jace Heimerdinger is just like not as good as it once was. So it's really hard to look at that as like a viable option. Yeah, I don't know. I do feel like BC Buster Shots is much more face up in terms of what they're bringing. It's going to be pretty aggressively slanted. It's going to be just throwing stuff at you. So in that sense, I think that Majin has an advantage just because he should be able to prep into that. Just because what else would you be doing with this set of cards from Bust? Maybe bring just one timeline. So maybe bring like it's like Trundle Vi. That's for other timelines. It's a bit more mid-rangey. Maybe go like Caitlyn, Samira, Control, and then Lulu, Poppy. No, it's still like ending up in this aggro world. I struggle to see a lineup that Bust is going to be able to bust out that isn't like aggressively slanted.
What if you did? Hold up. I might be cooking a little too much here, but what if you did like a Jax Bandle Tree deck?
Jesus, Jax. You can. Tree got changed. I'd be a bit concerned just because, with the advent of explorers, that's sort of a thing you can only do once. Because the moment you do it once, everyone's just going to bring explorers against you.
True, but like how many explorers are being run in like Rise decks and stuff like that?
Yeah, 0, right? But they can homecoming it. I think one homecoming on your tree actually just ruins your entire game plan.
True. I did not think about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, oh man, there's so much like back and forth between the lineup building. I'm really excited to see what these players end up bringing, or if Majin just brings the same 3 decks again, and if we just completely overthought it.
I'm based. If you got to do it, you got to do it. See, the issue is like I look at this Yumi. I think that Yumi's a really strong champion right now in normal Legend and Terra. The issue is that I know Majin Bay, and Majin Bay is never going to use Yumi in the way that she's good. He's never going to slap in like this elusive lineup. It's just not going to happen. That's just not Majin Bay. So like even though we look at like a champion like that, she's just a Targon tag. That's all she is. Maybe a Bandle tag. She's not really going to be able to be used to her, fullest, I don't think.
Yeah. We'll have to see if Majin can maybe surprise the viewers and do something a little bit unexpected. But that's going to have to wait and see. Let's go ahead and move on to our third match, which is Slay, head of Los Charlangas, versus Cephalopods Fossborough FC. Cephalopod is now 1-1 after beating Majin, as we just talked about. Slay is our current only 0-2 player in the series. He has not yet won a match. But if you look at his roster, you wouldn't believe it, right? Except for maybe that Pike.
I do think that Slay has a few good pairings. But the big weakness in this lineup is that when you bring these Runeterran champions like Kayn and like Aatrox, you're going to be like inherently very limited. You can throw them together and maybe you could play like Aatrox Gwyn. But outside of those, I think that these champions are going to be like a hindrance more often than not when you're prep phase, because you're very limited beyond that, what you're able to actually do. It's kind of like 2 holes in your lineup. Outside of that, you have some good champions. You have Seraphine. You have Nora, even Viego. Viego's pretty good in this format. You could play like Viego Nora, and that's going to be like a solid deck. But I do think that it's rather limited on the whole, especially with like, your only access to Cosmic Call being Aurelion Soul, who, historically is not the strongest champion in the game. Yeah, I do think that Slay's pretty limited, but it does have some pretty strong decks available to them. So, there's definitely options, and you can even cook a little bit. I think that Riven Quinn is like a tier 2 deck that people have played before, where it just like tries to like OTK or rally on you with Cataclysm. Like there's definitely cooking options available, but in terms of like obvious options beyond like Kayn Aatrox, it's a little sus.
Sure. One of the things that has been done by Slay has brought Shyvana Aesol both weeks, but not as like a Dragon's deck, but as like a Cosmic Call deck, like a complete Targon like sort of thing, which week 1 was probably a bait, probably took Spids by surprise a little bit, but like now that he's done it twice in a row, I feel like everyone is seeing it coming.
Yeah. Has he been seeing much success with the deck itself?
I don't think he's even gotten to play the deck. I think I think he's just been getting stomped. It's either been banned or like Aatrox Kayn is getting bullied or something like that.
Yeah, and I do think that Aatrox Kayn, I do feel like it's just kind of the hole in this lineup. Because, like, let's be honest, Aatrox Kayn is like the exact same in Eternal as it is in Standard. There's 0 card changes.
Yeah.
And in Standard, it's not that good. So like when we go into like an Eternal format where people are abusing some of the most broken cards in the game, I don't know if like Aatrox Kayn is the type of deck that's going to be able to hold up.
Yeah, we'll have to see if he proves us wrong. But I want to say that Slay's roster is still like a very scary roster. However, I'm looking at Cephalopod's roster going into it, and I'm just thinking, holy moly, man! Like this does not look like a fun week for Slay.
Yeah, Cephalopod's roster is really, there's definitely a lot of stuff going on here, especially, if you know Cephalopod, who very much is a cooker. He will cook up some crazy shit if you give him the chance. So, definitely, if he knows what you're going to bring, he will bring something to try and beat you. I did want to say, looking at, what Cephalopod had brought previously, in week 1, it was nothing but it was a lot of spice, and not a whole lot of wins coming out of that spice. No. Week 2, he cooled it down a little bit. He brought Soraka Kindred, which is just like a Cosmic Call deck. He brought Vayne Rumble, and then he brought Echo Zillion. Even it's a little bit silly Echo Zillion with like some Explorers to try and beat Rise. It still is much more standard, right? And it seems like when he's leaning more towards the standard, his decks so far have been doing a little bit better. But it's Cephalopod. Cephalopod's never going to be happy with just playing normal decks.
Yeah, that's fair. But even looking at like combinations that like aren't too unorthodox, like I'm looking at Set Jack into Aatrox Kane, and I'm thinking like all of my weapons are getting destroyed, my set's leveling up and obliterating all these darkened units. Like that feels like a good matchup, like in theory. Do you think it will in practice?
Yeah, so Set Jack, even in this last standard, was very good because it just like randomly beat every single weapon deck, right? Like if you tried to play Aatrox, they accidentally are running like 6 weapon removal, and it's all really good and it's all really effective against you. And that's not even including like once Set flips and just absolutely starts destroying your board. That's pretty bad. Even like Vayne Ornn is like a very solid combination of like cards that like ends up in a pretty strong deck. Kindred also is a very flexible champion. I think one of the biggest things that we learned from the first round of CDS is that SI champions are just incredibly, incredibly valuable, especially splashable ones like Kindred. I think that, I feel like Cephalopod is in a very good position coming into this.
So would you say, and we'll have to go back and do this with the last match because it's something I forgot to do, but would you say that you feel like Cephalopod is favored going into this matchup, not just going off of the records that we're looking at, but just like looking at these rosters?
Yeah, even just looking at the rosters, I do think that Cephalopod's very favored. I do think that Slay has lines, right? Like has options available. Maybe you go like Seraphine, Asol, some sort of a cat deck, and then you go like Viego, Nora, and then you find like a third solid deck that's like beating a lot of these mid-range type things. Because like if nothing else, Cephalopod is going to bring mid-range decks. So he doesn't have a whole lot else available to him. Like a lot of mid-range, maybe a tiny bit of control. And like if you're able to take advantage of that, then you could end up putting yourself in a good position. But as it is, I do feel like Cephalopod's going to be pretty favored here.
All right, that is a matchup that I think you and I are both in agreement on. We technically didn't say it officially for the last match, so I just want to loop back and say, who do we think is favored between the Ionian Idiots and the Battle City Buster Shots? I'm leaning a little bit towards Bust, actually.
I could see it. Bust's plan is very obvious and very straightforward, and like will be very strong, right? I think a lot of it's just going to come down to whether or not Majin's able to find like the third deck that's going to be solid into these mid-range or into these like aggressively slanted decks. I do feel like Majin, if he spends enough time on it, will probably be able to find a deck in here that's going to be good enough into aggro. If the one thing that Majin loves to do is it doesn't matter what tournament he's playing in, he never wants to be weak in aggro. Rise doesn't really lend itself towards that, but in general, I think that Majin will probably be able to find a third deck, and if he does, I think he'll be in a very good spot.
I am in agreement. It's definitely not like a 70-30 sort of matchup. Like it's real close.
Agreed.
But going into the fourth match, we have the Redeemed Qualities, coached by Spids, going up against Dizimondo ORNG. Both of these players 1-1 in the series. Both of them having won week 1 and have lost in the previous week. Spids, for those who don't know, is the previous champion of season 1, won it all, and got the invite to come back here into the series. And lineup is definitely different than last season. Has some new cards like Neela here and there, but definitely still has some things that ring like classic Spids, like the Gwen that did so well for her last season, as well as the Leona that I think you stole from her last time going around.
Yeah, Leona was really strong the last CDS. You know, she's eaten a couple nerfs since then, but still is a very flexible champion. Very good in like these mid-range style decks against mid-range style decks. Also, is a Cosmic Call option. I do think that Spids is very good at taking advantage of just regions. You know, she drafted something like Kennen, which Kennen's a very not great champion, but obviously has played it twice already. And you know, it's mainly because of that region combination of Ionia and Vandal City, like a lot of flexibility in that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to take a second. Hold up. I want to pull this up. I want to pull up a specific Spids deck from last week that ended up getting banned, but I just think, like, wow, look at this.
I was looking at the spreadsheet and I'm like, oh, Ken and Kaisa, what the hell is that? And I clicked on it, it's like, oh, it's Shellfolk. Okay,
yeah,
it's Shellfolk.
It's Shellfolk with Valley of Imitation. We've got like the bursting backpack Shellfolk combo now. One condensed. This is some spice right here, and like Jay Sensational just like banned this instantly. He said this is terrifying.
Yeah, I think that Jason's style of decks would have a lot of trouble into this. Like you kind of have to have on-demand landmark removal to beat this type of deck, just because it goes off on turn 6 and it's very hard to beat from that position. Yeah, I mean, Showfolk, we're going into Eternal here in a week. This is definitely a deck that you would expect to at least be tier 2. You know, maybe not with this champion combination necessarily, but you know. You got to make do with what you have in the CDS.
Absolutely. No, the bursting backpack shenanigans are definitely still available and something that people might have to watch out for. Also, the Poro King hasn't had a chance to shine yet in the Champion Draft series, but we've actually seen like Targon Poro King on Standard Ladder recently, and technically could do that with Leona or do like a Demacia Poro King. Like you have so many options if you want to have a deck that just goes bigger than your opponent with all the Poro snacks, and then just like you can sort of fit like any champion that you aren't using with it, really.
Yeah, Poro King, weirdly enough, you know, is a pretty flexible champion in terms of at least regions that people have tried him with, right? Like there's definitely the Targon one is the premier one right now, but Freljord has seen its time, Shadow Isles, even like Demacia, like you can make do with quite a few different regions with Poro King just because his package is pretty self-sufficient. Is it the strongest thing on the planet? Not at the moment, but I think if you have a good read on what your opponent's bringing, you could end up bringing it. But yeah, notably Spids, only one region that she doesn't have access to, and that's the PNZ. So, you know, obviously very spread out, very flexible, and Spids is willing to cook. You know, no matter what, Spids is willing to cook.
Tyler in chat's also bringing up champion strength with like Lucian and just like your board full of like cheap 1-drops that just get buffed to huge numbers and just stomping the game right here. And I definitely think that's an option you can utilize Poro King for if you're not using Lucian for something else.
Yeah, 100%. You know, there's just infinite options. It's going to be really hard, you know, especially even like last CDS, Spids like basically built a new lineup every single week. So looking at this one, you know, with access to all these different regions, I would expect something similar. Yeah. Whereas, you know, if Spiz is like the epitome of, you know, flexibility in terms of the regions available to her, I look at L games and that's a lot of Freljord. That's a lot of Shadow Isles. It's very limited, I feel like, in terms of what you're able to do with it, just because, you know, the Shadow Isles Freljord region combination can only be brought once.
That being said, I think that L Games roster here is deceptively aggressive, more than you might say, because even like before L Games, there have been several trades going into this week. Like L Games, as we mentioned earlier, traded Samira for Hecarim, now has Hecarim, also traded Volibear for Zed. I think obtaining both Hecarim and Zed in the same week sort of screams ephemerals to me. Like that is something that they are looking for potentially pushing. Teemo and Gnar can definitely like fuel a bunch of different like aggressive finishing decks. You can have Darius just as like a finisher in a Noxus like aggressive deck. Callista even with certain like Shadow Isles aggro. I remember looking at L Games roster week 1 and being like, all right, this guy is going for like feel the rush, control, and he's just going to do like Shadow Isles, harrowing, like big late game stuff. And then he brought like a bunch of aggro decks and just like rolled over. I think it was Roji week 1. I want to say.
Yeah, Timo Callista is, like I'm looking at it's the pure burn deck.
He had Caustic Salesman. He was running Caustic Salesman.
It's actually pure burn.
Yeah.
And then Darius Nar is of course a very good deck right now. That's just very, very aggressive. I do agree that there is some flexibility in that regard, but even like last week, I think that L Games, if you ask them, very much was feeling the region combination issues because they brought Trundle Irelia, which it's just the Field of Mina deck, but instead of running Mina, you're running Irelia.
Yeah,
and Irelia's not really doing a whole lot for that deck.
There was a 10-10 quick attack that spawns a couple of 1/1s every turn.
That's pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
pretty. It's definitely
she has a 2. That's kind of cool. You get the 1 mana back on your FTR.
Oh, that's true. I didn't even think about that.
It's broken.
It's broken. No, but I definitely, if I was Spids, I would not count out L Games at all as like being something that's like easy to predict. I would definitely still consider like a lot of different options that they can pull out of a hat, especially if they are willing to do like Tryndamere Irelia sort of shenanigans, things that you initially wouldn't expect, but might just be different than what you're trying to counter, and you might end up mind gamesing yourself if you're the redeemed qualities.
I do feel like, though, a lot of the decks that L Games has access to, whether it's these really aggro ones or these really control-y ones, I feel like all of them have a lot of trouble into like strong mid range. And I think that if Spids is, good at one thing, it's strong mid range decks. So I wonder if Spids just brings like a generically good mid range lineup and is just able to sort of, position herself very well into L Games this week.
It's possible. And now that you have less Freljord champions, you have less risk of your mid range decks just like always being frostbitten.
Yeah, like I'm struggling to see like multiple Freljord decks that are going to end up being good. So I think like Darius Nar is like probably a bring, some sort of Darius Freljord deck, just because it is like an aggressively slanted mid-range deck that like can do well into other mid-range decks. But outside of that, it's do you bring Hecarim Zed? Hecarim Zed kind of folds to like anything that is able to throw units at you, just because Ephemeral is very strong in offense, not so strong in defense. Can you bring like the burn strategies? A lot of the burn strategies do fold to like aggressively slanted mid range. If Spids ends up bringing like Gwen, Lucian, Samira, Draven, Plunder, then like I think you're in a really rough position. You're gonna have a hard time.
How do you feel about Neela in Spids' lineup, which is one of the champions I think she has yet to bring? Already having Bilgewater access with Gangplank, I think it just pairs a little bit better with Sejuani if you're going like the plunder route. But I definitely think still has potential. Do you think it comes out this week against...
Potentially, I'm looking at like Neela Draven as like this seems like a reasonable combination of like two generically strong cards and some sort of like aggressively slanted mid-range deck. Has that region combination historically been fantastic? Not necessarily. I think that Neela definitely not necessarily in like a mid-range style archetype. But I think there's a lot of options available. I think Neela, the only like really success that we've seen, in like normal Legend and Terra is with Piltover and Zon. So not having access to that is like a little bit hindering. But she could just play like Neela Gwen, right? And that's like probably a really solid like aggressively slanted deck. I think that there are a lot of options available for this Neela. It's just going to be like finding the position where you want Bilgewater but you don't want Gangplank. Which I'm sure she'll find it soon.
Excited to see that champion come out. Also, for those of you who are looking at like the time zones for these matches that are listed up here and might be a little bit confused, the United States and its neighboring nations are, I believe, tomorrow having the daylight savings time end. So that's something that's coming into play in the schedule. If these times look off, I promise you that they are not. There's just going to be an hour differential now.
Yeah.
All
but
right.
yeah, I do think I think this is very much like just the battle of an incredibly flexible lineup versus a less flexible lineup in terms of like regions. It'll be interesting to see who's able to come out on top. I would lean towards Spids. I feel like she just has a bit too much going on for her, but I could see a world where, at the end of the day, if you bring some aggro decks have a pretty good shot at just beating anyone.
That's true. I definitely think that Spids has a very good chance of winning this, but I just have this gut feeling that L Games is just going to pull out some sort of surprise factor. I think that his lineup is very deceiving and it definitely is limited region-wise, but I think it's less limited than a lot of players look into it and see. And I'm really excited to see what he brings out in this match. But
I wonder if there's just easy trades that L Games could make. I feel like they want another Noxus. I feel like they want access to Bilgewater.
They just traded away another Noxus champion in Samira.
Yeah, and Samira's kind of not that good.
Yeah. I think
but I'm not
accessible.
Sure if LeBlanc would be better. Yeah, Swain. I feel like if they had access to not I guess I'd have Darius, but another aggro deck might be kind of good. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting. Definitely interesting.
We'll have to see. Well, we're getting into our last match of the week, and it is a pretty spicy one. We have the Windswept Warriors with Jay Sensational up against Grandpa Roji's Extrusive Elementals. These guys were picks right next to each other during the draft. And also, both of them lost week 1 and won last week. So we're going to see which one of them begins to pull ahead of the competition and which one ends up staying 1-2.
Yeah, and I mean, if we thought that a couple of the people we've talked about in the last couple of rounds have been rather limited in their pools, I'm looking at Roji. Roji is the definition of limited. That said, Roji selected champion combinations that he's very comfortable with. Obviously, Talia Malphite is what Roji is known for. Those are 2 champions he has. Varus Akshan is what Roji is known for. Those are 2 champions he has. And then he has a few different options outside of that. Like Fiora Pantheon is a deck that he loves. Talia Ziggs is always available to him. Even Pantheon Varus, right? He just has a bunch of combinations of Roji decks that he loves. It's certainly. I feel like if you asked Roji, he probably got literally everything he wanted in his draft.
I believe he said exactly that. And it's interesting to look at how Roji has adapted to this series over the course of time, because I would say that I agree with you. Roji's very limited on rosters, but has basically everything he would want. But week 1, we saw that completely abused. We saw Shodox
the triple aggro, right?
Yeah, well, not triple aggro, but Shodox was able to, I believe, take him down with I mentioned the Jin burn over the course of time and stuff like that, and he was very much able to just remove and go past a lot of these big units that Roji's playing. And then Roji last week said, you know what? I'm not going to be predictable anymore. And he played I want to say it was Malphite Akshan. It was Akshan Malphite.
Malphite Akshan, which is, it's just Cosmic
It's just Cosmic Call, yeah. He also did that with Pantheon, too. Pantheon was just a Cosmic Call engine as well. He completely switched up his formula to make himself unpredictable. And he ended up winning the game because of it, I think. And I think it was a big factor in that.
Yeah. That is funny. That having access to Targon, Targon's just at the drop of a hat, you could just fall back into a Cosmic Call deck and it's probably gonna be fine. That's very funny. That's very funny. Yeah. As opposed to Jason, I mean, I look at Jason's lineup and I love Jason's lineup. There's a lot of really good combinations here. Obviously the Yasuo. That was always going to be something that Jason wanted to pick up. But Yasuo Katarina is very strong. Janna is, of course, an incredibly strong champion and an incredibly flexible and versatile region, in Piltover and Zon. Another one I really like is Fizz. I think that Fizz is one of the best selections in CDS just because access to Bandle as well as Bilgewater and being a flexible champion is really good. Even with what he has available here. Nocturne, is not the best Shadow Isles champion, but it is a Shadow Isles champion It took me several weeks last time before I figured out that I needed SI, and he ended up picking it up right away. I like a lot of what he has going on, and even looking further down, Galio Udyr is just like a strong deck. That just is a good deck.
He's brought it twice, and it's been banned twice.
Yeah, I think that if I'm looking for weaknesses, triple Ionia is not the most flexible set on the planet. I imagine he fell into this Lee Sin as like last pick and didn't see anything particularly better. But yeah, in general, I like a lot of what he has going on. But it's going to be some off the wall decks, right? Like you're playing for regions rather than for just champions, I think.
This lineup actually reminds me a lot of your lineup last season, because you had Katarina Yasuo, you had Vi instead of Janna, but I think you would have taken Janna over Vi in a heartbeat. The Karma Nocturne for Shadow Isles access instead of Maokai, it's no surprise to me that you really like this lineup, because
it's very similar. It's very similar to what I had last time. I think I had like a Poppy in there or something, and Leona. It's basically like the same thing. Yeah, I will say notably, no access to Cosmic Call definitely hurts, some of the flexibility that otherwise might have. But I don't know, there's just a lot of really strong options here. I mean, even like Karma Nocturne is like this spooky Karma deck that's like always been good. You can go Karma Janna, you can go Fizz. I do want more PNZ. I want more PNZ in his lineup. Are there any PNZ champions available?
I don't think so. I think.
Okay, well, he needs to find a way to get more PNZ.
3 of them.
Yeah, PNZ's where it's at.
Yeah.
But no, I think that he has a lot of flexibility going on here. Nico, of course, not the best champion, not necessarily the most flexible, but Nico is her own region, and you could just like throw with any Freljord unit, and that's it's reasonable.
Yeah, or even like I don't know, you could do like a like Galio Demacia sort of thing. I'm kind of like dissuading myself as I say it out loud, but it's there, and you can definitely take people by surprise. It's not something that you would really expect your opponent to bring.
I think an interesting thing would be knowing how your decks line up into Cosmic Call specifically, just because Roji doesn't have access to like Shadow Owls, so you don't have to worry about bringing Galio, right? Galio's always going to have a field day. So you're probably like just locking in Galio Udyr. I'm bringing that. It's good into all the mid-range decks, and it's probably fine into Cosmic Call. You bring like Yasuo Katarina. It's also good into a bunch of mid-range decks. It's pretty aggressive, so it's usually solid into like those like control-y archetypes. I don't know what your third deck ends up being, but I do think that there's like a path here for Jason to be pretty good in Roji.
And I mean, let's be real. He's probably going to bring Yasuo Katarina just as like a deck like that's pretty much guaranteed from this guy, right?
Yeah, and Yasuo Katarina is like always a solid deck. It's just it's one of those decks that people just like kind of forget about, and unless you really want to play it, you're probably not going to play it. But it's solid. It's very solid, and yeah, I mean, if there's somebody who wants to play it, it is Jason Sensational. Yeah,
the one thing about that though is like one of the things that makes Yasuo Katarina such a strong deck is the Hillock landmark, and even if Explorers didn't exist, Roji has all the landmark removal he wanted.
True. But to be fair, I think that like a tempo positive deck like Yasuo Katarina that's looking to abuse your mana feels pretty okay about, you playing like some understated units to be able to remove the landmark. I could be wrong. I haven't played Yasuo in a world of Explorers, but I feel like it's probably something that you can take advantage of. If you have like 2 Fey Blade Twirlers and like a Yasuo, and then you play the landmark, and opponent, spends 5 mana to get like a bad unit and break the landmark, like, you're probably okay with it.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. All right, so what exactly do we think that Roji might bring into this lineup? Now that we've talked a little bit about Jason's lineup, like he has a lot of common pairings, but what do you think? What direction do you think you go with? He has yet to utilize Xerath at all.
Yeah, Xerath is a champion that Roji's a big fan of. Like Zillion Xerath is one of his favorite decks. I don't know. Can we build Zillion Xerath?
Well, we would need. We don't have Zillion, but we technically could use like Ziggs.
Yeah, Ziggs Xerath is probably going to be just as good, huh?
Probably.
Yeah, because Ziggs also likes the landmark removal and gives you Bandle. Like, yeah. that might be a direction that he goes. If he ever does play Xerath, I imagine it would be with that.
Technically could go Sundisk. Technically.
Could go Sundisk. I think Sundisk with only one Ascended, probably you're going to have trouble flipping your Sundisk. Maybe with like Clock Hand. You run Clock Hand, you flip Xerath. There might be a line.
Yeah. It would certainly be funny. It would certainly be the highlight of the week. Roji, if you're listening.
Did you see the Secret Keeper deck? The Monoshirima? So if you don't put any Ascended in your deck, then Secret Keeper has like a 2% chance to hit a leveled Ascended unit and put it in your deck. And it instantly rolls back your Sundisk. So you can flip Sundisk on like turn 3.
No way.
It's the chance is incredibly low, but it's there. It's there. He could play Ziggs Talia Sundisk.
That's
and, just
so funny. Oh man. Yeah, I mean that makes sense mechanically, but I never thought about it. Yeah.
It's really wild.
All right, well, I might be about to queue something up on Ladder pretty soon.
Yeah, no, I imagine. I mean, there's like 2 directions Roji can go, right? It's like the mid-range aggressive, Talia Ziggs, Akshan Pantheon, or Akshan Samira, or Akshan Varus, that one, and then like Pantheon Fiora. This is like the aggressively slanted mid-range. That's like very good into like control decks. Or you could go. Like the Cosmic Call style. He showed like kind of, it feels like the 2 sides to this. If he does want like more control, he does have access to that Xerath deck. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say which direction Roji will go because it feels like the aggressively slanted decks. I think that Jason has a lot of control. And like when you bring, like Akshan, Varus, so you bring this Pantheon deck and you bring like a Talia deck, you're going to be pretty good into like those control decks. But, maybe that's too face up. Maybe he's too worried about getting hard countered by mid range. It's hard to say.
Yeah, we also haven't really seen him like double down too much on like elites just yet, which was something that was definitely a what do you want to call it? Not like a phase, but it was like it was a trend last season, if you remember, for a few weeks, where like a lot of players were utilizing Demacia to like bring elites and stuff like that.
Yeah, it had just gotten buffed. It got like the dog. It got like another change or something. But I mean, yeah, it's an Eternal, and like elites can only ever be so bad. They're like fine. They're fine. They're always going to be fine. There's definitely going to be like lineups that have trouble dealing with that type of unit aggression.
And you have a bunch of Shuriman champs if you really wanted those Shuriman elites too.
True.
You wanted that option. But what are we leaning towards as far as like who we think has the edge in this matchup as we sort of like finish up this pregame show here?
I think that Roji probably has the edge, but I mean, it just kind of is going to come down to like if Jason wants to like hard target one of these styles and if he hits. He definitely has the tools available to do it. I think that Jason has a lot of cooking available in his lineup. But yeah, I think I might lean towards Roji.
I'm going to lean towards Jason just to be different. I feel like I may have just watched a Jason video where he was talking about the decks that he brought against Spids and ended up winning, and like the weaknesses that he thought he had and how he might be considering improving going into his future opponents. And I think he gave me a lot of faith in how he's going to perform this week, and we'll see if he ends up delivering on that.
I definitely think there's a path for him. There's definitely a path of him beating like basically any lineup that Roji throws forward. The issue is, just calling him on that. I think he definitely has potential to take it down.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here on the first ever like pregame show for the Champion Draft Series. I like doing more open form stuff like this. We got a lot of new stuff coming out with Champion Draft Series over the next few weeks. We have the recaps that always happen every Sunday. You will be getting another recap this Sunday of this past week's matches and a special interview with Cephalopod on his specific attack strategy against Majin Bei's Rise deck. That will be included in there. But we've also got a couple of new shows popping up, including this one, which should probably be on our channel on Monday. We've also got if you remember deck dives from the recaps last season, that's going to be its own thing now. We've got Prism Sword working on that. He's going to be the host of that show, and that should come up on the channel very soon. That series, I'm looking forward to that, as well as a few other surprises coming down the line that you guys should really look forward to. We have, I'm not going to spoil too many things just yet, but a couple of teasers. Just to keep those of you who tuned in for this or are watching this on YouTube a little excited. I've got something planned for later in the season that is a really cool way of giving the viewers more involvement or more interaction in the Champion Draft Series. I don't have an exact date for that then, but it's going to be sometime later in the season when we are trying it out. So look forward to that. Definitely keep up to date with the series for that sort of update, as well as another event that I am currently planning for right after the season ends. That is, I won't tell you exactly what it is, but for one thing, it's going to be an open invitation. So everyone, it won't be like the Champion Draft Series where we only have like a certain number of seats and invite people. Anyone who wants to participate can. And we're thinking of giving a seat to join in on season 3 to the winner of that event. So definitely, keep following the Champion Draft Series for more updates on that particular event. I'm really excited for that when it comes to fruition. But I just want to give you guys a little teaser right now for being a part of this first episode. I definitely wanted to do this earlier, but my work schedule sort of kept me away from that. But we're here now, and I want to really thank Aikado for joining me and sort of giving his advanced insight with all of his experience playing in the series, as I have only kind of just like watched and gone over the data. He actually has been there on the front lines.
I hope that was helpful. I hope that brought any amount of insight into this.
And now you guys can take everything that Aikado said and choose that as your pick'ems this week. And hopefully you will end up being one of the recognized ones at the end of the recap. But until then, thank you all for joining us, those of you who joined us live. And thank you, all of you, for watching. And you will be seeing more from the Champion Draft Series on our YouTube, on Twitter, and maybe a little bit more on Twitch over the course of the next couple of weeks. But for now, thank you all, and we will see you again soon.